Tripod, the official Trinity University Press podcast, invites authors, journalists, community leaders, and other guests to engage in exploratory, informative discussions on the subjects of people, places, and the planet. I'm Lily Brennan, and welcome back to another episode of Tripod, the official podcast of the Trinity University Press. Joining me today is JJ Lopez, the general manager of the KRTU Radio Station, a professor of audio production and radio broadcasting at Trinity University, local jazz enthusiast, and an all-vinyl DJ of classic and modern soul music. JJ is here to discuss the history of jazz in San Antonio, KRTU's part in the story, and how engaging with music from your culture and that of others can benefit the individual, broader communities, and the world. Welcome, JJ.
Thanks, Lily. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
such a wonderful setup and a wonderful topic. So
I'm so excited because I just had Joey Palacios from Texas Public Radio in, and we got to talk a lot about radio specifically, but there's also just the other side. TPR does music stations, of course, but the KRT side of things being jazz and music, and I know you've had a busy summer with that as well.
Yeah, but we're all unified. TPR, KRTU, unified left of the dial.
Yes.
Joey and I went to undergrad together. Well, even before undergrad, we got radio degrees at SAC, and we're in the same class.
Oh, yeah.
So we were there at the same time.
I feel like we've talked about that before. Well, because I should note for listeners that obviously you were my professor for audio production at Trinity, which for anybody that's listening to the podcast, if you enjoy it, I've learned everything from JJ and Joey together. Yeah. Taught me everything about recording audio, interview, which has been so helpful. But I know you've been busy outside of teaching over the summer with the Soul Spot and doing DJ events, performances. Could you just tell us a bit about yourself in general and then the Soul Spot and what you've been up to with DJing?
Yeah, so I'm JJ. I have been in San Antonio since 1995. What brought me here was the fact that I grew up in Corpus Christi. That's where I'm from. And right out of high school, in 1989, I went to my first nightclub and I really fell in love with it. I was like really into nightclub culture. I was like, this is amazing. I want this to be my future. But, I tried college and it wasn't for me. And I actually moved away from my hometown to be in a city with a bigger night scene, bigger club scene, And I found myself in San Antonio. Me and some friends all moved here. They've moved on. I stayed. I met my wife and my family. And so happy that I did because I love San Antonio. I feel there's so much you can do as a creative, whether it's in the arts or it's in music or even the nonprofit sector, I think is really important. Absolutely. So, I've been here since 95. And as luck would have it, around 2007, someone saw me DJing out in the community where they're like, you ever been in radio? And I said, no, but I'm looking for that next chapter in my life.
Sweet.
And it was someone from KRTU, and they said, we've got a Saturday show. Would you like to do it? I said, sure. So about a year into that, I realized this is my avenue. And I actually went back to college and got radio degree, undergrad degree in cultural studies with a concentration on music culture and hybrid music culture.
Wow.
And then I got a graduate degree. And by that time, I was already at KRTU, and then I became station manager, then general manager. I was a producer for several years as a part-timer before all that. And then I've been there ever since.
I feel like that so goes to show, sometimes going to college, I don't know, I just graduated college, but my freshman year, I was like, I have no idea what I want to do. And I felt very just not engaged with my classes. Yeah. And that just goes to show if you have a passion, you find that passion in school or later on and go back to school, that is the driving force. It's so essential to building out your education. So I definitely resonate with that part of your story.
School's got to make sense.
It's got to make sense. And it's a lot of work. So if you're not passionate about what you're putting the work towards, then it just gets harder and harder. Yeah. And now you have the Soul Spot. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So the Soul Spot is very much my personal passion project. It's an organization. It's a collective now of DJs. It's been 16 years of this collective of putting on disco parties and soul parties. And then now we're at the Lighthouse Lounge and we continue this tradition. So when I learned to DJ, I learned from an old disco DJ. So I learned real traditional style. But our collective is really committed to that old school roots, vinyl culture. super nerdy stuff. But that's a passion project, and it's been a great year. You were just saying we're playing out in the community. Mm-hmm. San Antonio Parks Foundation caught wind of this organization. They're like, JJ, can we do a disco party? It was so much fun. We did like 600 people in the park.
I feel like that's got to be the best way to, I don't know, engage with the community just by throwing that out there. Although I will say, one of my first concerts in San Antonio was a KRTU Music Fest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is, I don't know if you could tell us a bit about the events that KRTU puts on, and maybe just a little bit more about KRTU outside
Absolutely.
of the DJ aspect.
So in the professional world, I'm the general manager of the station. Mm-hmm. We're a jazz and indie music station. We're a non-commercial radio station, just like TPR, just like KSYM. The station was founded in January 23rd, 1976. Nice. And I joined the team in 2007 as a community radio station. Our mission is to support local artists, musicians, and visual artists, work with nonprofits, and through those partnerships ensure that we're contributing to the sort of the growth of the city in a healthy way, connecting communities, celebrating music and arts, and celebrating nonprofits. And so that's our mission, and we do all that through the radio station. And at the same time, we're sort of like twofold. We're committed to the comm department and the classroom experience and providing experiential learning for students. And with all of that, we have radio programs, we have community-facing programs, we put on concerts. So one of the things you're talking about was a newly developed and initiative of all of our interns. So they produce KRTU Fest, which is amazing.
And I want to touch back a bit onto the focus of KRTU and its history with jazz, because I feel like KRTU is really set apart through that history and how it's also specifically tied to San Antonio.
Absolutely.
If you could just explain a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, as a non-commercial radio station, community support as well as receiving university support is paramount. So even from the very beginning, when the station was founded in 76, for several years, it was a classical resource to the community. It was also alternative music programming to the community throughout the 80s into the 90s. And in the mid-90s and into the late 90s, they started to have jazz people on air, so they were doing jazz. And classical and jazz are already minority formats, but you find them in public media and non-commercial media to ensure that they have a presence in our sort of wide cultural landscape of radio. And that was sort of the format. It was a little bit of rock, a little bit of classical, a little bit of jazz, mostly classical in the day. But KPAC is San Antonio's wonderful classical radio station. Mm-hmm. It was already happening. And Texas Public Radio was really taking shape. So in 2001, the question was, we really need to commit to a format, and what is that format we're going to do? And by that stage, there were several people from the community who were in support of jazz were also on air. Mm-hmm. And they made the pitch, we should become a jazz station. There's already classical. There's not that many jazz stations around the country. And San Antonio, to your point, has a rich history of jazz. Yes. We should give it a platform. And many in the community supported it. The decision was made formally in 2002, and that's when we became a jazz station. Mm-hmm. Classical kind of stopped because you have KPAC. Mm-hmm. And the notes that I've read and many of the people I've interviewed, because we've done oral histories about this, all of them, that first membership drive was the most successful drive in the history of the station, right out the gate. So they realized there's a community to support this. The artists are there. We're a jazz station. So now we're one of 2 in Texas, one of 59 in the United States. Wow. So that tells you how unique we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And within that, we have our own unique identity, and amongst all the radio stations where we're super hip. In January, I was on a panel in New York and Brooklyn about the future of jazz radio. It was an international panel. So it was nice to contribute how KRTU has been successful in that model. It's cool.
And that was a different one to when you met Ira Glass, right?
Yeah, it was a different one. That was a podcast conference.
Yes. I remember you coming into class.
I was seriously fanning out. Yes. I was like, oh my God, there's a Godfather podcasting right there. Don't fan out.
Right.
But he was sweet. He was so nice.
Well, outside of that passion with Ira Glass and podcasting, I know you're passionate about jazz, not only because you DJ, but because you get to do that through KRTU all the time. Has jazz always been a part of your life? Is it always a genre you've gravitated towards, or was it shown to you by someone?
No, jazz came late in my really appreciation of music. Mm-hmm. My passion has always been soul music. Like at a very young age, the first music I heard, I remember it was Kool and the Gang, and I remember I was so into it, dancing in the mirror. And then I remember I bought my first Herbie Hancock tape, and then a Robert Johnson tape. So I've always been into blues and soul. But soul music has always been that through line, whether it was soulful disco or soulful house music. And it had jazzy elements. But when I was brought on board at KRTU in 2007, they said, it's a jazz station. Do you know jazz? And I'm like, I know jazz stuff.
Adjacent.
I know when it's jazzy.
Yeah.
And I knew a lot of the main artists. And as I kind of got there, they were like, well, it's a soul jazz show. So it's jazz, how, when it gets funky, when it has soul roots, when it's neo soul, when it's R&B, that's your show. And I said, great.
Cool.
And then having just a music nerd, and I love music, I started like picking up on the history of jazz and then like learning all about jazz artists. And then when it was an opportunity to be a profession, I was like, this is amazing. I can learn a lot about jazz if this is going to prove to be a profession. And I did. I'm naturally inquisitive about jazz. I absolutely love it. There are some really smart people out there that know a lot about jazz.
Of course.
It's been a real joy to learn about jazz and such an honor to talk about it, even in this setting right here.
Yeah. It's not a genre that I personally know a lot about.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily seek it out when I'm on Spotify or Apple Music.
Yeah.
But when I'm listening to the radio, KRTU or other stations, or when it comes on in a movie or a soundtrack, I'm always so entranced by it. It has that nature because it is so improvisational.
It is.
And it's just every time it's different and it's so historic. And I always love that. But bringing that up was to say I wouldn't say that my taste in music is necessarily soul-based or jazz-based, but I was curious how you would kind of define your taste in it. And when you're DJing or on set for KRTU, are you going off your own taste, or are you adjusting those sets to your environment?
Yeah.
So I guess that's a two-part question.
That's a great question.
Your taste
great question.
And then the environment.
For my taste, when I'm DJing out in the public, I'm at Soul Spot, 100% my taste. I am the curator. There's no like professional, well, I am always a professional, but there's no like pressure that someone else's voice is dictating what I have to do, other than like, is the floor full or am I losing them? You know, because I'm a disc jockey. And, we want to keep people on the dance floor. So that's mainly my taste. And my natural taste is like my selections are soulful. They have soulful vocals. They have lots of jazz elements, and it's very groovy, very song oriented. And then having learned from disco guys, and then every different genre, we actually play it different as DJs, and we mix it different. But that's that through line. At the radio station, it's different because it is a professional setting, and there are metrics and other parameters that dictate, is this a good song for right now in the afternoon, or is this better suited for the morning, or is this sucker just way out there? Like, I don't know who's going to get this song. Maybe we shouldn't play. It's like really avant-garde, and maybe it has its place late evening on a Monday, which is probably the case.
Gotcha.
So those are dictated by those factors, but there is a time where I apply my taste, but that taste is run through sort of the lens of music director, what's good for radio, is this a good song, things like that.
I think that temporal detail of what music do I listen to when I'm just waking up versus what music am I listening to before I'm about to go out on the town.
For sure.
That detail and the time of day is definitely something that I would say I take into account in my musical environment. If you
curating your day.
Yeah, or even people have a beach playlist. Or
for sure.
So I can definitely see if you're DJing, like you got to come up with a house mix, you got to come up with a soul mix. So I can see how environment plays a role in that. Do you think by engaging with music that's connected to an environment's culture, so for San Antonio, for instance, obviously with KRTU, it's essential to have jazz because San Antonio is so connected to that history. Do you think that's beneficial to listeners to maybe learn about our history, about the environment through listening to music related to the culture?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we want to celebrate our local jazz artists, right? One of the real pride, sort of like points of pride, like real joy at KRTU is we have a show called the South Texas Jazz Project. It is devoted squarely to spotlighting local and regional artists, because if we don't tell their story, who's going to tell their story? And I say this sometimes at really big stages. I'm like, thanks for supporting Texas artists. Thanks for supporting San Antonio artists, because New York ain't going to tell that story.
No.
LA, Chicago, they're going to tell their story. It's our job to tell the story of our local artists. And there are several to celebrate, What I think is good about that is, one, people maybe they're not ready to leap to, say, like a John Coltrane, or if they like vocal jazz, ready to get into Billie Holiday. But if you can reverse engineer it and say, well, hey, if you went to Lanier and you like brass bands, maybe Latin Breed, who you might recognize, for their contribution to Tejano music, were also great jazz artists, and so you can like reverse engineer that sort of gateway.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're like, oh, I know these local artists, and you're like, great, well, all of them were celebrated jazz artists. And then, there are a lot of avenues for getting people involved.
Yeah, I think that reciprocation, that setup of what you're doing right now in the world could potentially inspire a song
for sure.
in the future.
Yeah.
And also that those who are making music are connecting back with those like listening to it in that specific area. I really like that sort of cycle of things. I was just going to branch away to more or not necessarily historically, but more information about jazz, I think, as it pertains to its cultural impact.
For sure.
Obviously, San Antonio has its own history with it, but I was thinking more broadly, what does that look like?
Sure. Jazz as a phenomenon, as a music phenomenon, is really fascinating. One, if we're talking like hip hop, if we're talking like other styles of new music, even disco or electronic music, 50 years old, maybe 40 years old, 30 years old, these newer genres, newer electronic music genres are even lesser, right? Jazz over 100 years old. So you have to understand, we're talking about one of the oldest genres that exists in American music. It is America's classical music, Turn of the 20th century, by first you had piano roll jazz and like, Scott Joplin, all of these great like jazz age artists. When we're talking about jazz formally, though, by the late teens, in 1920, the first orchestras start and America's developing. And for the very first time, you have like youth culture. In America, because we have middle class and things are developing. Right. That youth culture needed a place to go, and jazz was the first popular music for that first round of youth culture in America. And there were swing dancers, and it was the Roaring 20s, and there was, all the way up to about the 40s. Even the early 1950s, jazz was like the dominant thing you listened to. It was on the Victrola, it was on the radio, it was everywhere. Not until later does that start to change. The rise of rock and roll knocks jazz off as as the country's popular music, and then other styles start to come up, R&B, and then soul, and then it has its history, and that has a wide-reaching impact on all of the communities across the country, and not just like later in the game. Troy Floyd and a New Orleans transplant by the name of Don Albert both had what are called territory bands in the late teens in San Antonio. San Antonio is a bustling city. We're a military town. We also had a lot of technology before other places. So there's a lot of entertainment coming through this area. So those are some of the earliest territory bands. They had a lot of New Orleans people coming over here and performing. And then by the 30s and 40s, Duke Ellington was here. Billie Holiday came to the east side. All played at the Carver. Dizzy Gillespie played here.
Wow.
And so that had an incredible impact on San Antonio. Also, the blues circuit, the soul circuit, traveled across the country, and the safe haven was called the Chitlin Circuit, right? This is pre-civil rights.
Trinity University Press is a mission-driven publisher committed to civic engagement with timely ideas facilitated by the publication of print and digital books, related media, creative and educational programs, and other activities that help us all better understand our place in a crowded world. For more than 50 years, Trinity University Press has published more than 225 titles and organized thousands of events, all focused on broadening our understanding of many impactful subjects, from human relationships with our physical environments to social equity and justice. For more information about Trinity University Press, visit tupress.org.
Civil rights era, you needed a place to stay. You could safely travel all the way to San Antonio South and still be safe and perform. And San Antonio was one of the last stops for this circuit. So you got all these great blues artists coming here. And then that kind of seeps in and starts to impact a lot of people. Jazz was coming through on the radio. And then people like on the west side, a lot of these like young Latino guys started playing jazz. On the east side, you had these great R&B players that were inspiring a lot of people. Clifford Scott is a saxophonist, played with Ray Charles. And then his cousin, which was Spot Barnett, who also played with Ray Charles, was from San Antonio. He's a legendary saxophonist.
Cool.
Then around that time in the late 1950s, early 1960s, father and son moved here from Dallas, and that was the Cullum family. So Jim Cullum and Jim Cullum Jr., clarinet player senior, and the son was a cornet player inspired by Louis Armstrong, and they played New Orleans jazz, and they got so successful that they launched their own nightclub from the Riverwalk, the Landing, and it's broadcast on the radio across the country.
Wow.
So popular. And they really become fixtures of the national jazz scene, bringing jazz artists to San Antonio. And that lasts well into the late 80s.
Right.
Into the 90s, as a matter of fact. Jim Cullum and his legacy lasted a long time. That has a big impact on everybody. Those young Latinos going and seeing Clifford Scott and their various clubs at the Eastwood inspired them. And then you get like the West Side Sound, which is this hybrid of like the Tejano sound a little bit with like the kind of a soul sound and R&B sound, but it was all very jazzy, very unique to San Antonio. So all of this is like just a mixture of sounds inspired by jazz. And today you can speak to any number of jazz musicians and they will cite those key movements and players as shaping the jazz we have today.
Just want to say first, that's awesome. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. And then that made me think really regionally just now of how there's different sounds to each part of just Texas and then broader, the whole world. I think you were saying you came from Corpus Christi to San Antonio and that music was a huge part of getting you connected to San Antonio and part of the city. How would you recommend that other people go on that same journey of if they want to feel more connected to their environment, their city, how can they get into the music scene of things to help them get connected to that history, that culture, maybe, through that insight, learn that whole story of these are the regional voices that I can resonate with.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people? How do they
for sure.
that?
When I travel and we'll go to a town, I always look up like, I wonder what artists are from that town, from that city. Because to me, I have a vantage point where I probably know all the main artists from throughout the country and their regions, right? We already know Philadelphia is going to be great for these organists and these trumpet players and these key players. But when we go to other communities, I always go online and I'm like, who are their local legends? Who do they celebrate when they have their annual festival and say, this person is from here, from this city, let's celebrate them, like Freddie Fender is from San Benito, it's like a little town in Texas, and he was a conjunto king, and a Tex-Mex king. So I always say, look up the town, where you're going or the region that you want, local artists that people celebrate, maybe there's a museum of local artists that you want to go check out. And I think that's important because major artists, they're going to get theirs. You know what I'm saying? Like they're going to get it either on the radio or they're going to get it on the internet or they're going to go viral or you're going to hear about them. They're being written about. But so often women in jazz, women artists, they don't get celebrated as much as like these great legendary men. So like find a local female artist or a woman artist that you can like learn about or an alternative voice of a particular style that's not on your radar. Get into it. You can learn so much. And often that's going to take you to a piano player that they played with, that'll take you to a drum, that'll take you to this. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing,
Yeah.
I think that's worth celebrating.
I absolutely agree. And I feel like putting in that individual effort of doing that research and going on that hunt for connections is also really rewarding and it teaches you a lot and it makes you have that, I don't know, to draw the comparison of like doing the physical disc jockey moment versus like somebody just like handing you a song to listen to that's been given to you by an algorithm. Like going on that search to do that research and find those personal
It's the original algorithm. You got to do it. It's rewarding. You'll find like, wow, it didn't.
Well, and I feel like another great way to get involved in the music culture of a specific area, especially if you're moving to a new place, is through a public or a local radio station.
For sure.
Like I think KRTU does such a great job of representing so many different voices and doing that work for the listener of, hey, here's an artist that's local to us. Here's something I'm going to teach you about that. And then here's some songs by them.
Yeah.
So, I think that's another great way to connect. And I think beyond the individual listener, KRTU and other local stations, well, I think a lot of people don't know that they put on community events to bring people together. Obviously, KRTU Fest is an example, but can you also give us some more examples of how KRTU and other stations bring the community together through music?
Yeah, for sure. So one of our real premier partnerships is with the San Antonio Parks Foundation, and we put on Jazz at the Japanese Tea Gardens, free and open to the public. And by design, we feature local artists, and we always take like 10 minutes before we get started. We're like, hey, welcome to the show. Many of you all know how this works. Today it's Toro Flores. Did you all know Toro's a local teacher? He's a vibraphonist. He plays marimba and he plays guitar. Toro, come up here real quick. And we always take that little moment just to go the extra mile, teach you a little bit about what you're going to hear. It's kind of fun, lowers the pressure a little bit. And so we partner with Ruby City, which is a contemporary art space, which is in Southtown. We partner with them. We've been stretching out and bringing like Austin artists to give them a platform in San Antonio as well. And that's been a lot of fun, a little bit more forward-thinking music. That's kind of a model. We like partnering with nonprofits. If the nonprofit says, we'd like to throw a concert, we're like, great, let's do a local artist, let's partner, and let's elevate all of our missions. And it's a model that has worked now for, as long as I've been there, since 2013, and, doing these shows. It's fun. We also partner with San Antonio Parks Foundation, do Jazz Alive, and that's the biggest celebration we can do in the city for jazz. That's incredible.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit more about Jazz Alive?
Yeah.
I haven't really had the opportunity to engage with it that much myself, so I'd love to learn more about it.
No, it's fun. It was originally founded by Lila Cockrell, who was, one of the first women mayors in the city. She was a huge jazz fan. It was amazing. So that's good for business. But it has, it's a long-standing tradition in San Antonio, also put on by the Parks Foundation and the city. It was at Travis Park for several years. Now it's down in was at Legacy Park. What I love about that is KRTU has a supporting stage, and then you have this other main stage.
Right.
And the main stage is always going to book, a couple national or international traveling artists on Friday and Saturday. They'll book a couple high-profile regional artists and then a couple local artists, and we always wave the flag. We're all local on our stage. We may bring in some that are already recording, have been on KRTU and have presence, and we can tell their story. But, it's another opportunity to spotlight our local artists. It's important.
Yeah.
And, this is a little off topic, but it's not. But, to have a healthy scene, a community, particularly for jazz, we know when I speak to other markets, you need a couple things. You need radio station helps tremendously. You want that radio station. You want local venues supporting jazz, like Jazz Texas, or like River Sun and the Jazz Standard. And then a festival like that, that just really solidifies the deal. And then if you want to go a little bit further, it's nice when jazz is in the schools. So we know UIW has got a great program, and a lot of the high schools have programs. St. Mary's has a great program. And then there's record stores, kind of keeping in touch with them, like, hey, y'all got jazz sections? And they do. All of them have great jazz sections.
Yes.
You get all that. You get an active community. You got great little healthy ecosystem there to sustain something like this.
Yeah, I think that was such a great summary of not only why I invited you to come talk about this, but specifically this topic because Tripod's tagline is People, Places, Planet.
That's it.
So that's it, of bringing people together to listen to music, talk about music, which helps them engage with their place, their community. And I kind of want to touch a bit more on that last part of Planet, of how do you think having those engaged, informed listeners connected to their musical scene or the jazz scene for us, how do you think that impacts, our world culture? How is that important?
Yeah, that's a good question. It could go down several avenues on there, but I think food and music are aspects of culture that can be really great ways to experience and celebrate a culture. And it's such a politically charged time in our world.
Right.
And I think for those that are interested in sometimes, like a device, putting it all down for a minute, it's kind of nice,
Yeah.
And music can be that sometimes, I know music can also be politically charged, but I think when we're talking about community and creating an experience that really does bring people together, and you're reminded of that human potential for hanging out with strangers and be all like, hey,
or
this
even
is
talking
cool.
about the artist, the humanization of hey, this guy's a teacher and he also is a dentist, but this also.
But welcome, maybe you want to talk to him after the show. You can do that.
Yeah.
All of that, I think, represents music's potential, and kind of tying it back to being a DJ. One of the things that that drives me to continue to be a DJ at 51 years old is I absolutely love when it's a really healthy working dance floor, 100, 200 people in, and we've been locked in for already 3-4 hours, and you realize this is working. This is working. It is my hope that a good chunk of this percentage leave tonight and realize, wow, that was great being around other people dancing.
I haven't been to a lot of concerts, but I did go to a big music festival in Chicago, Lollapalooza.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
And just music festivals, music concerts, live concerts is like that feeling of singing the words to a song that everybody in that crowd knows or dancing to the same song is, you come away from that and that is the most visceral feeling of I am connected to people and that we're all here to just like have fun and enjoy a work of art. And such a performative work of art, I think is great because you're not only connecting to the DJ or the performer or whoever's making the music, but you're also with so many other people. And I think there's not that many experiences like that anymore. Or there are, but people are a little bit more hesitant to engage with that. I think I've said this almost every episode, just bringing people in to talk about arts and culture and public engagement is just people are a little more hesitant about it.
They are.
And people are a little less communicative, a little less neighborly. But I think in those scenes, it's like, I can remember the concert I went to where it was so hot outside and people were like dropping like flies.
Oh yeah.
They were, you've been standing for hours waiting for this person to perform and then you just don't feel so good.
Sure.
And the next person over is like, oh, I have water, I have this, I have that. Because we all want to make the experience the best as possible.
Yeah, it's a community. Yeah.
And I think that's great. And my final and other kind of, not off topic, but like more surface level question. Yeah. Is there any artists that you would recommend to listeners like myself who should become part of that music scene?
Oh, yeah.
Is there any artists that you think are a good entry point?
There's an alto saxophonist. Her name is Lakeisha Benjamin. She's got a great look.
What a name, too.
Yeah, she's got a great look. She's an alto saxophonist. When you hear her play, you know, okay, she understands the great history of this instrument. So you can hear all the artists from, say, all the founders like Charlie Parker, who's the great first alto saxophonist. Well, not first, but prominent alto saxophonist. And then you hear all the legions of alto saxophonists that have led up to her, but then you hear her own voice. And then she's a young artist, so her inspiration and the influence she brings are not just like swing music and jazz and all that, but it's like soulful, it gets real funky and R&B, and sometimes it's hip hop, and I think she's really Lakeisha Benjamin is worth checking out. But then also closer to home, and just a little plug, KRTU is about to turn 50 years old. And so January 23rd of 2026 is our 50th anniversary.
Awesome.
And Jasmia Horn from Fort Worth, Texas, who's in New York, is our headlining artist, and she's a vocalist. She's a powerhouse. It's going to be a great show. And so, you can check out Jasmia Horn for vocalist, and as an alto saxophonist, Lakeisha Benjamin's pretty
great. Well, thank you for those recommendations.
Hope that helps. Yeah,
yes.
Thank you.
But thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining JJ and I for another episode of exploring people, places, and our planet with Tripod. Come back soon.